There comes a time in your life when you've prayed every prayer you know how to pray, cried every tear you had to cry, and questioned God in the silence of your soul. Lord, how is this going to work out? But I came to tell somebody today, when it's God's will, you don't have to worry about the way. We want clarity. You don't have to figure it all out. You don't need a map when you've got the maker. You don't need the blueprint when the builder is already at work, because God's will carries his way. His provision is tied to his purpose. His direction is hidden in your obedience. So stop stressing about the how and start trusting the W.O., the God who parted the Red Sea, the God who made water flow from a rock, the God who brought fire down from heaven. He's still the same God today. If he gave you the vision, he's already prepared the victory. So I dare you to release the worry, shake off the fear, and say it with your chesting. If it's God's will, I don't need to worry about the way. There are moments in life when we look around and everything seems out of place. The doors that should open stay shut. The people we counted on suddenly disappear. The path we thought we were meant to walk becomes blocked with obstacles, uncertainty, and disappointment. And in those moments, we ask the question, God, if this is really your will, then why is it so hard to find the way? But here's the truth that often gets overlooked in the noise of frustration and fear. When it is truly God's will, the way doesn't need to be visible. It just needs to be his. God's will carries his way. It may not look like what you expected. It may not arrive on your timeline. It may not be smooth, convenient, or comfortable. But it will always be sure, because God never authors a will without also preparing the way to fulfill it. Take a moment and consider the story of the Israelites at the Red Sea. God had already told Moses to lead his people out of Egypt. That was his will. Clear, divine, and powerful. But no sooner had they begun their journey than they found themselves trapped. Pharaoh behind them, the sea in front of them. There was no visible way forward. Every logical path was closed. From a human standpoint, it seemed like God had made a mistake, or that Moses had misheard the command. But Moses had not misheard, and God had not abandoned them. Because when it's God's will, the Red Sea isn't the end. It's the beginning of the miracle. You see, God's way isn't always paved with clarity. Sometimes it's paved with chaos first. Sometimes it's paved with what looks like failure, delay, and loss. But that doesn't mean you're off course. It means you're on God's timing. We want clarity. The very place that looks like your stopping point is often the exact place God has chosen to show you his glory. When you understand this, you stop panicking when the road vanishes. You stop questioning your calling just because the details don't make sense. Because the absence of clarity is not the absence of God. His will may be hidden from sight, but it's never lost in purpose. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts, and His ways, His ways are beyond what we can comprehend. So what do you do when the way disappears? You anchor yourself in the will. You remind yourself of what God already said. If He told you to go, then go. Even if you don't see the next step. If He planted a dream in your heart, don't bury it just because the path isn't visible. When God speaks, His word does not return void. That means even when the earth shakes, the promise still stands. Let's talk about Abraham for a second. God told him to leave everything he knew and go to a land He would show him. Not a land He described in full. Not a GPS location. Just a promise. That's all. Go to the place I will show you. Can you imagine that? Abraham had to walk with no visible end in sight, trusting only the voice of God. That's what faith looks like when it's tested. That's what it means to follow God's will, even when the way is uncertain. And do you know what happened? God led him step by step. Every place his foot touched, God confirmed His word. The same is true for you. God may not show you the whole path, but He will guide your next step. We want clarity. You don't need to know the whole way. You just need to know that He's the one leading. There is so much peace in knowing that if it's God's will, you don't have to force the way. You don't have to manipulate the doors. You don't have to strive in your own strength. What He wills, He supports. What He ordains, He funds. What He begins, He completes. If you're walking in His purpose, then His power will make a way, even through waters, wilderness, and walls. This doesn't mean the journey will be easy. It means it will be possible. And not because of your qualifications, intelligence, or strategy, but because of His grace. When God makes a way, it comes with peace. It may be surrounded by storms, but there will be peace inside your spirit that says, I know I'm where I'm supposed to be. That peace is your compass. That peace is your confirmation. You don't need every detail when you have the voice of the shepherd guiding you. You don't need every assurance when His presence is walking beside you. Yes, you'll face moments of doubt. Yes, you'll be tempted to turn around. But don't. Because God is not just the author of your journey. He's also the waymaker in your wilderness. Sometimes, the way forward isn't revealed until you start moving. The Red Sea didn't part while Israel was standing still in fear. It parted when Moses obeyed and stretched his hand. Jericho's walls didn't fall while the people stood outside staring. They fell after 7 days of marching in obedience. Miracles are often waiting on the other side of your movement. So stop saying, I don't see the way. That's okay. Say instead, I know the will. If you know that God has called you, then go with confidence. If you know that God has confirmed it, then move forward, even if your knees are trembling. Faith isn't about walking without fear. It's about walking anyway, because you trust the one who leads. God has never called anyone without providing the way forward. He may not reveal it all at once. He may lead you through the valley, through the fire, and through the night. But He will lead you. And when it's His will, there will always be a way. Even if He has to part a sea, shut the mouths of lions, or open prison doors at midnight. So today, stop worrying about how it's going to happen. Stop stressing over the steps you can't yet see. If it's God's will, then rest in knowing He's already made the way. All you have to do is keep walking in faith. We live in a world obsessed with explanations. Before we take a step, we want to know what the outcome will be. Before we invest, we want the return clearly defined. Before we obey, we want the blueprint. But the kingdom of God doesn't operate like that. God doesn't hand out explanations. He gives instructions. He doesn't promise clarity. He offers calling. And when it's truly from Him, provision doesn't show up before obedience. It follows it. Too many people are waiting for God to provide first before they move. They say, God, once you open the door, I'll walk through it. But God is saying, start walking, and I'll open the door. Obedience is the key that unlocks provision. You can't sit back and wait for the whole picture before you act in faith. That's not trust. That's control. Look at the life of Elijah. God told him to go to a brook called Cherith, where he would drink from the water and be fed by ravens. Now, that doesn't make any logical sense. Ravens are known for taking food, not giving it. But God said it, and Elijah obeyed, and the provision came. It didn't come before Elijah moved. It came when he got there. That's how God works. He doesn't give you a feast to convince you to obey. He gives you a word. And then God did something even stranger. When the brook dried up, God sent Elijah to Zarephath, where a widow, not a wealthy landowner, not a king, was going to feed him. When Elijah arrived, the widow was preparing her last meal. She didn't have enough for herself and her son, let alone a stranger. But Elijah asked her to make him a cake first. That request seems harsh, even selfish. Until you understand the principle, obedience brings multiplication. When the widow obeyed, her jar never ran dry. Her flour never wasted away. Not because she had an abundance beforehand, but because she acted in faith when it didn't make sense. Provision followed obedience, not explanation. Some of you are stuck at the edge of your breakthrough, waiting for more confirmation. You want God to show you where the money's coming from, where the help is going to arrive, or how the dream will come to life. But God is saying, move first. Trust me first. Obey me first. Then watch what I will do. The enemy loves to paralyze us with the need for understanding. He whispers, don't move yet. What if it doesn't work out? What if the money doesn't come through? What if you fail? But God is not limited by what ifs. He's the God of I am. If He told you to do it, He has already factored in what you cannot see. He knows where the ram is when Abraham is climbing the mountain. He knows where the fish is that holds the coin when Peter needs to pay the temple tax. He knows how to provide, but he's waiting on your obedience. Don't miss your miracle because you're waiting for understanding. The truth is, you may never get the full explanation. God's plans often don't make sense to the natural mind. But that's where trust grows. Faith is not built in clarity. It's built in uncertainty. God uses those moments to refine your trust, deepen your faith, and draw you closer to Him. Think about Noah. God told him to build a boat when there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Noah didn't need to know when the rain was coming. He didn't need to understand how long the flood would last. He just needed to obey. And because he obeyed, he and his family were saved. The provision for Noah's survival was in the obedience, not the explanation. The same applies to you. Your provision, your next breakthrough, your next blessing, your next level is not hidden in some mystery. It's wrapped in your response to God's voice. When He says move, you move. When He says give, you give. When He says forgive, you forgive. When He says go, you go. That's when things begin to shift. That's when heaven starts to respond. That's when resources, people, and favor start to align in your direction. Not because you understood it all, but because you obeyed. God is not obligated to fund your plan, but He will always fund His purpose. If you're walking in your own will, don't expect heaven's backing. But if you're walking in obedience to His word, every need will be met. Every tool you require will be provided. Every door you need will swing open at the right time. Some of us have been praying for provision, but we haven't stepped into position. You can't ask God to rain down blessings if you're not standing where He told you to stand. The manna didn't fall in Egypt. It fell in the wilderness where God led them. The miracle didn't happen in the comfort zone. It happened in the obedience zone. And don't confuse delay with denial. Sometimes provision doesn't come immediately after your step of faith. Sometimes there's a stretch, a test, a moment of silence. But hold on. Keep obeying. Provision is coming. God is never late. He's just positioning things behind the scenes. He's working it out in ways you can't yet see. But make no mistake, when you obey, provision will find you. It might not look like what you expected. It might come through people you didn't anticipate. It might require you to humble yourself, stretch your faith, or change your strategy. But it will come. God's word is true, and He honors those who trust Him enough to take action. So today, stop waiting for the full picture. Stop demanding all the answers. Listen for His voice and obey. The provision you're praying for is tied to the step you haven't taken yet. Walk it out. Trust Him. Because when you move in obedience, heaven moves in power. When you're walking in God's will, one of the hardest things to face is a delay. You've prayed. You've obeyed. You've taken steps in faith, and yet nothing seems to move. The door remains shut. The breakthrough hasn't come. The silence feels deafening, and in that waiting room of life, doubt creeps in. You begin to question if you heard God correctly. You wonder if you made a mistake. But let this truth sink deep into your soul. Divine delays are not denials. They are often setups for something greater than you imagined. God doesn't operate on your clock. He isn't bound by your schedule. His timing is perfect, not convenient. And when God delays something, it's never to hurt you. It's to prepare you. There are some blessings that require a process before they can be released. You're not just waiting on God. Sometimes God is waiting on you. Waiting for you to grow, mature, heal, forgive, strengthen, or let go of something that would destroy the very thing you're praying for. Look at the story of Lazarus. Mary and Martha sent word to Jesus saying, "Lord, the one you love is sick." They were expecting him to come immediately. But the Bible says Jesus stayed where he was for 2 more days. That delay wasn't accidental. It was intentional. When Jesus finally arrived, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. Everyone thought it was too late, but Jesus told them plainly, "This sickness will not end in death, but for the glory of God." That delay wasn't denial. It was a divine setup for resurrection. Sometimes, what looks like death in your life is actually the staging ground for a miracle. What feels like abandonment is often God's way of setting the scene so no one else can take the credit. If Jesus had come earlier, Lazarus would have been healed. But people would have said, "It's because we called him just in time." But because he waited, everyone knew. This wasn't a recovery. This was a resurrection. This wasn't just a healing. It was a demonstration of divine authority. The delay made the miracle undeniable. That's what God is doing in your life right now. You may feel stuck. You may feel forgotten. But heaven is not silent. God is orchestrating something behind the scenes. He's setting the stage in a way that when your breakthrough comes, no one will be able to say it was luck, or timing, or your own efforts. They'll have to say, "This was God." The children of Israel understood delay. They spent 400 years in slavery, and then 40 more years wandering in the wilderness. It wasn't because God couldn't deliver them faster. It was because their hearts weren't ready. God could part the Red Sea in a moment, but preparing his people to walk in promise took time. Why? Because you can't live in freedom with a slavery mindset. We want clarity. You can't handle Canaan if you're still thinking like Egypt. Some of us are frustrated with God's delay. We want clarity, but we haven't dealt with what's still holding us back. We're praying for promotion while still carrying insecurity. We're asking for more while struggling to manage what we already have. And God, in his mercy, delays. Not to punish us, but to protect us. He won't give you something that will crush you. He waits until you're ready to carry the weight of what he's prepared. David was anointed king as a teenager, but he didn't sit on the throne until years later. Why? Because the throne wasn't ready for David, and David wasn't ready for the throne. The delay between the promise and the fulfillment was filled with battles, betrayals, and brokenness. But it was also filled with growth. David learned how to lead not in a palace, but in caves. He learned how to fight not with titles, but with trust. And when the time was right, God opened the door no man could shut. Don't despise the delay. Don't misinterpret the waiting season as rejection. It's often in the waiting where the most important work is done. It's in the quiet spaces that God does his deepest work. He's forming something in you, strengthening your character, deepening your roots, teaching you to depend on him. Not just for blessings, but for breath. Sometimes we treat God like a vending machining insert prayer, expect instant result. But God is not a machine. He's a father. And good fathers don't give their children everything they ask for immediately. They give what's best when it's best. They know timing matters. Just like a fruit must ripen before it's picked, so must we. Even Jesus experienced divine delay. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he prayed, "If it's possible, let this cup pass from me." But the cup didn't pass. The cross still came. And through that pain, salvation came to the world. Delay, even when it leads to suffering, can be redemptive in God's hands. So what do you do in the delay? You worship. You wait. You remain faithful. You keep walking. You don't stop just because the timeline doesn't make sense. You remind yourself that God is still in control, that he sees what you can't, that he's not punishing you. He's preparing you. Because when the delay ends and the door opens, you'll look back and understand why it had to happen this way. We want clarity. You'll realize that if God had answered when you wanted, you wouldn't have been ready. You would have settled for less. You would have stepped into something that looked good, but wasn't God. So today, take a deep breath. Let go of the anxiety. Trust the process. The silence doesn't mean God is absent. The waiting doesn't mean he's forgotten. The delay is a part of the design. Divine delays are not denials. They're setups for glory. And when God moves, he will make up for every tear, every lonely night, every closed door, and every time you felt like giving up. When he moves, it will be worth the wait. There are seasons in life when nothing makes sense. When you can't see the road ahead, when all the signs are unclear, and every door you try to walk through feels locked. It's in those moments that your faith is truly tested, not by the presence of trouble, but by the absence of clarity. When everything in you wants to understand, to plan, to control, God whispers, "Trust me." And here's what you must hold on to: faith doesn't require sight, just trust in his voice. Faith isn't about knowing every detail. It's about knowing the one who called you. It's about following his voice, even when it leads you into unfamiliar territory. That's why Scripture says, we walk by faith, not by sight. Sight is what the natural man depends on: vision, facts, logic, visibility. But faith is born where sight ends. It begins when you stop leaning on your own understanding and start depending fully on what God said, even when it doesn't align with what you see. Look at Abraham. God told him to leave everything he knew, his land, his relatives, his comfort zone, and go to a place that God would show him. God didn't give him the destination up front. He gave him a direction, not a detail. And Abraham went, not because he saw the finish line, but because he heard the voice of God. That's faith. Moving without a map, trusting without a timeline, believing without a blueprint. And yet, many of us struggle with this. We want certainty. We want God to show us step 1 through 10 before we take step 1. But God says, if you trust me, I'll reveal the next step when you need it. Faith isn't about having the whole staircase. It's about taking the first step, even when it looks like you're stepping into nothing. Think about Peter. He saw Jesus walking on the water and said, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come. And Jesus said one word, come. That's it. No plan, no safety net. Just an invitation. And Peter, fueled by faith, stepped out of the boat. The water didn't become solid until his foot touched it. The miracle didn't begin until obedience met faith. And though he sank, when he looked at the storm, the truth remains. He walked on water not because of sight, but because of trust in the voice that called him. You see, faith is about relationship. You don't need to see the path if you know the shepherd. Sheep don't follow the map. They follow the voice of the shepherd. Jesus said, my sheep know my voice. And if you know his voice, you can trust his leading. Even when it takes you into the wilderness, even when it leads you through valleys, even when the world says you're crazy for believing what you can't see, faith says, I don't know how, but I know who, and that's enough. Some of you are in the middle of situations right now where your sight is failing you. The circumstances don't look good. The numbers don't add up. The diagnosis looks bad. The opportunity seems lost. And you've been praying for a sign. But let me remind you, God may not always give you a sign, but he's already given you a word. If he said you're going to make it, believe it. If he said he'll provide, stand on it. If he said he's with you, don't let fear control your steps. This is where spiritual maturity comes in. Immature faith needs proof. Mature faith needs only a promise. That's why Jesus rebuked the generation that always asked for signs. He wasn't being harsh. He was trying to shift them from surface level belief to deep trust. The kind of trust that holds on when it's dark. The kind of faith that worships even when you don't understand. The kind of belief that says, even if he doesn't move the mountain right now, I'll still trust him. In Hebrews 11, the Hall of Faith, we read about people who trusted God, even when they never saw the promise fulfilled in their lifetime. Yet, they are celebrated for their faith. Why? Because their trust wasn't in outcomes. It was in God's nature. They didn't walk by sight. They walked by trust. The problem with sight is that it's limited. Your eyes can only see what's in front of you. But God sees the end from the beginning. He sees the road ahead that you cannot. And if He's asking you to step forward, it's not because He's guessing. It's because He already knows what's waiting on the other side. You don't need to know everything to trust God with anything. You just need to take the next step. That may mean applying for something again after rejection. It may mean forgiving someone even when you don't feel like it. It may mean staying faithful when it seems fruitless. But in every step of obedience, you're declaring, God, I trust your voice more than my eyes. And don't be surprised if people around you don't understand. Faith will make you look foolish until the promise is fulfilled. Noah looked crazy building an ark when there wasn't a cloud in the sky. But when the rain came, no one was laughing anymore. The same people who questioned your steps of faith will one day marvel at what God did through your obedience. Faith doesn't require sight. It requires surrender. It's waking up each day and saying, God, I may not see the whole picture, but I trust you. Lead me, guide me, shape me. I'm yours. It's praying, not my will, but yours be done. And it's believing that His voice is enough to carry you through any storm, any delay, any detour. So today, stop waiting to see it before you believe it. Tune your heart to His voice. Lean into the whispers of the Holy Spirit. Remind yourself that if God said it, it will come to pass. You don't need the evidence when you have the assurance. Because in the end, it won't be your eyes that lead you to victory. It will be your faith. And faith, even the size of a mustard seed, can move mountains. So keep walking. Keep trusting. Keep listening to His voice. You may not see the full way ahead, but you're being led by the one who made the way. And that's more than enough. There's a level of peace and power you step into when you finally understand this one truth. The outcome is God's responsibility. Your job is to walk in surrender. That shift in mindset can change your whole life. Because so many of us are carrying weight we were never meant to carry. We're trying to control outcomes, fix situations, force doors open, and make everything work according to our limited understanding. But God never asked you to control the result. He only asked you to obey, trust, and surrender the process. When you surrender, you're not giving up. You're giving it over. You're placing your plans, your fears, your dreams, your deadlines into the hands of the one who sees the end from the beginning. You're saying, God, I'll do what you called me to do, but I'm going to leave the outcome in your hands. That is the essence of real faith. Not controlling, not stressing, not manipulating, just trusting. Look at Moses. God told him to speak to Pharaoh. That was Moses' job. Deliver the message. But God didn't tell Moses to worry about whether Pharaoh would listen. That wasn't his assignment. The outcome, Pharaoh's response, was God's business. Moses simply had to walk in obedience and surrender. He had to trust that God would handle what was beyond his control. So many of us get stuck in anxiety and fear because we're trying to be responsible for things we were never anointed to carry. You're stressing over whether people will approve of you, whether the business will succeed, whether the relationship will last, whether the healing will come. And while those concerns are real, the truth is, none of that belongs in your hands. Your job is to pray, to believe, to obey, and to surrender. God's job is to bring the increase, to open the right doors, to change hearts, to make the impossible possible. When you take your hands off the outcome, you give God room to work. Sometimes we're so busy trying to fix it ourselves that we actually delay the very thing we're asking Him for. Surrender creates space for God to move. It tells heaven, I trust you enough to let go. That kind of trust honors God, and He always responds to it. Jesus showed us the perfect picture of this in the Garden of Gethsemane. As He faced the cross, He prayed, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet, not my will, but yours be done. That was surrender. He was fully honest with his emotions, fully aware of the pain ahead, yet he released the outcome to the Father. He didn't cling to comfort. He clung to purpose. And through that surrender, salvation was birthed. You see, surrender is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's not retreat, it's revelation. It's knowing that your strength has a limit, but God's strength is endless. It's realizing that your perspective is small, but God sees the whole picture. When you surrender, you shift the pressure off your shoulders and place it on the rock that is higher than you. And let's be honest, how many sleepless nights have you had trying to figure it all out? How much peace have you sacrificed trying to plan every detail? How much joy have you forfeited because you were afraid of what might happen? That's what happens when we try to control the outcome. It drains us. It depletes us. But the moment we surrender, there's a divine exchange. Our weakness for His strength, our worry for His peace, our plans for His perfect will. It doesn't mean life will be easy. It doesn't mean everything will go the way you expected. But it does mean you'll have the confidence to keep walking even when the path is unclear. You'll be able to say, I don't know how this ends, but I trust the one who does. That's freedom. Let's talk about Joseph for a moment. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, thrown into prison. All of it looked like a series of setbacks. But Joseph never stopped trusting God. He kept walking in surrender. He interpreted dreams. He served with excellence. He stayed faithful, even when he had no idea what the outcome would be. And one day, God elevated him to the second highest position in Egypt. The outcome was never in Joseph's hands. It was in God's. Joseph's job was to walk in surrender through every trial, every delay, every disappointment. And because he did, God used him not only to save a nation, but to restore the very family that had broken him. You may be in a place right now where nothing makes sense. You've done everything you know to do, and yet the results don't match your effort. You're tired. You're wondering when things will change. But here's the word for you today. Stop trying to carry the outcome. It's not yours to carry, lay it down. Surrender it to God. Tell him, Lord, I trust you with the outcome. I'll be faithful in the small things. I'll keep loving, keep praying, keep showing up, but I'm done trying to force it. I release the results to you. That's where peace lives. That's where joy returns. That's where strength is renewed. Because when you walk in surrender, you walk in alignment with heaven. You're no longer fighting battles that aren't yours. You're no longer drowning in questions you were never meant to answer. You're walking with the assurance that God's got this, and you don't have to. So whatever it is, your family, your future, your health, your finances, your ministry, give it back to God. Surrender doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing what's in your hands and trusting God with the rest. It means showing up in faith and leaving the results in His care. Because in the end, it's not your performance that produces the promise. It's God's power. Your surrender is the seed. And when you plant it in trust, God will bring a harvest greater than anything you could have forced into existence. The outcome is His. The surrender is yours. Let go and watch what God will do. Let me close by reminding you, if it's God's will, then you don't need to lose sleep over the way. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to see every step, know every answer, or understand every delay. Because the God who called you is the same God who carries you. And where He sends you, He provides. What He promises, He performs. You may be standing in front of a sea that won't part, a door that won't open, a prayer that hasn't been answered. But let me declare over you today, the will of God never goes unfunded. It never fails. It never returns empty. Even when you don't see the way, He's making a way. Even when you don't have the provision, it's waiting on the other side of your obedience. Even when the delay stretches longer than your patience, it's a setup for something greater. Even when you can't see the path, His voice is still leading. And even when the outcome is uncertain, your surrender is still enough. So stop stressing over what's beyond your reach. Let go of trying to control the uncontrollable. Lay the weight of the outcome at the feet of the Almighty and declare with boldness, if it's God's will, I don't need to worry about the way, because my Father is already there. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. That means your confusion isn't a surprise to Him. Your wilderness isn't wasted. Your delay isn't a detour. It's design. So walk forward with faith, with courage, with surrender, and with the confidence that you are not alone. Because the one who began this good work in you, He will be faithful to complete it. The will of God is your anchor. The way of God is your miracle, and the outcome is His glory. Amen.